What's up everyone, Criddle here, and in this video we're going to do a tier list of the solo ability of the various classes in Monsters and Memories. I've seen quite a few people asking lately what is the best class to solo with, so I figured I would give my opinion based on my experience in Monsters and Memories as well as similar games. Of course, this is mostly going to be for fun, so don't take my opinion too seriously, and my goal here is really just to help out players to hopefully choose a good class for them if they choose the solo life. That being said, this is not a very solo friendly game. You will want to get a group together or join a guild or something if you want to do all of the content in this game. If you try to do it all solo, you will have a very rough time. Some of the things that we're going to consider here are going to be game mechanics, class kits, downtime, and time to kill. So let's get into it. The first class we're going to talk about is the Archer, and this is a very high DPS class, which is very good for solo ability as you want to be able to take down your enemies as quickly as possible so you can move on to the next one. In addition to that, they are range DPS class, meaning they'll be able to keep a distance between themselves and their enemy, which reduces downtime significantly since they will not be taking much damage themselves. They also do have a couple of abilities to help them out. One is Pinning Shot, which knocks the enemy backwards and pins them in place or roots them in place, and the other one is Disengagement, which launches yourself backwards away from the enemy, again gaining distance so you can continue to do damage without taking damage yourself. So all of those things mean that this class will have very, very little downtime. But there are a couple of negatives to this. One is they do not have any type of movement speed buffs like Speed of the Wild. They could use potions if they wanted to, but that could get very expensive. So if you have a lot of money, that kind of helps them out quite a bit. Another one is No Snare ability, which could slow down the enemy, so you don't necessarily have to continue to knock them back and pin them in place. You could just snare them and slowly run backwards and take them out that way. And then they would also need a lot of room to kite because this is a kiting class. They need quite a bit of room to be able to move around, which limits their abilities a little bit. The last thing I want to cover here is going to be that it's going to require a lot of arrows to be able to play this class well and continue to do soloing, because you're going to be doing all of your damage really with arrows, so you're going to need quite a few of those. So all of that being said, I would put them at a low A tier or maybe high B tier. I'm going to put them at an A tier for right now. We're going to have to see as the game kind of progresses, but I would say that the Archer is going to be a fairly decent solo class, assuming you can get the Speed of the Wild buff somehow, and then you can have some pretty decent gear with your bow and arrow. Next up, we have the Bard. The Bard does have some songs which allow it to do damage to their enemy. They have both dots and direct damage songs to damage their enemy from a distance, which is very good for solo ability, as then they will not take damage themselves. In addition to that, they have Snare, which slows down the movement speed of their target, and movement speed buffs for themselves, which again allows them to gain more distance from their target so they don't have to take much damage themselves, which reduces downtime quite a bit. They do also have healing songs, so if they do take some damage, they can heal up a little bit faster. And they have mana regen song, which is needed because their damaging songs do require mana. So that mana regen song just again reduces their downtime. So all of those things kind of together really reduces the downtime of the Bard. And then the last thing I want to talk about is their charm ability, which is a high risk, high reward kind of scenario. The big negative to the charm ability, however, is that it only lasts for 18 seconds and it can break early, and it does have to either break or fade before you can recast it. So you will need to, constantly be looking at your charm pet and making sure that it is not breaking while you're trying to do some damage. But if you can juggle that properly, the Bard can be a very, very good solo class. It does have a few downsides, though. If you are not charm kiting or charm killing mobs, it will be a very, very slow kill, as their damaging spells or songs do not do a lot of damage. So they are slow kills. It also needs a bit of space to kite around, although not as much space as something like an Archer. So they could get away with a little bit less space than them. And then lastly, outdoor only on their movement speed buff, so they cannot cast that indoors. So if you're trying to fight inside of a dungeon, it's a little bit more difficult. Although you can still snare in a dungeon, you won't also have that movement speed buff. And then in addition to that, you need more room, and finding room inside of a dungeon can be difficult. So it does limit a little bit of that solo ability. All of that said, I would put the Bard at A tier, probably slightly above the Archer, but right there kind of with the Archer, and I think that's kind of where it's going to sit. Next up, we have our first pet class, which is the Beastmaster. And the Beastmaster does have heals, buffs, and a pet. All three of those things usually help the solo ability of a class, and this character has all of them. So the heals are going to help it reduce the downtime, although they still will have to meditate to get their mana back up, but it still significantly reduces downtime. The buffs, while not as good as a Shaman at the same level, the buffs are Shaman spells, but they are a hybrid class, so they get them 8 levels after the Shaman. They do help boost some of their stats that other classes that may not have these buffs will not have, so it kind of helps alleviate the need to have a little bit more gear on a melee dependent class. And speaking of melee, they are decent melee DPS, not super high, but good enough to where they are putting out decent damage to get that time to kill up a little bit. Now, that all said, I believe I already mentioned it, they are a hybrid class, meaning they're going to get spells later than the Shaman, so their healing spells will not be as efficient as that of a Shaman. So all of that together, we're going to also put the Beastmaster up here in the A tier. It's not going to necessarily be killing as fast as the Archer. It's going to have more downtime, though, than a Bard, but it's overall going to put them in about the same tier as those other two. Next up, we have our first healing class, and that is the Cleric. Clerics have the most efficient heals in the game. They have high HP buff. They can wear heavy armor, reducing some of the physical damage that they take, and they have a 15-second immunity buff, negating all damage they receive during that duration. Unfortunately, this is where the positives to the Cleric end, and we kind of have to start talking about the negatives. So the negatives to the Cleric is it still is going to have quite a bit of downtime after it heals, because it will have to meditate up, which does take quite a while. And they don't get anything like dual wield or double attack, reducing their time to kill significantly. Their direct damage spells, unfortunately, do not do enough damage to really make up for not having those other abilities. So I'm going to have to put Cleric here in the B tier because it is able to heal themselves up and stay in a fight longer. So it is able to solo certain things, but unfortunately their time to kill is very, very low and they're going to have some downtime. Now you could move them up into an A tier if you're going up against undead, but again, that severely limits the types of creatures that you can fight. So you're going to have to find those creatures during that level that you want to try to go in solo. Next up, we have our second healing class, and those are Druids. And Druids have heals, not only direct heals, but also a regen spell, so they can just regen faster than your typical class can. They also have dots and direct damage spells, which are not necessarily as high as other classes, but they are still very, very significant when you're talking about kiting mobs and doing some damage to them. They have the movement speed buff, so they can get away from their enemy and not take hits themselves. They have Snare, which further reduces the speed of the enemy that they're trying to fight. They can root their enemy if they get a little bit too close to go ahead and stop them completely and move farther away. They get a pet at level 32, which doesn't add a ton of damage, but every little bit of damage helps. And lastly, they have a mana regen buff, which significantly reduces downtime for a Druid. All of these things together make Druids very, very good at solo ability in this game. They only have a couple of cons, and that is that their movement speed spell only works outdoors, so they're not going to be able to use it indoor, and they do need a bit of space to kite. They can also charm beasts. So if you're going up against beasts, they could charm a beast and fight other beasts, which could be another thing that could help Druids out quite a bit. I'm going to put Druids here at a low S tier or maybe even high A tier. I'm going to put them up here at a low S tier because they are just very good. They are one of the most versatile classes in the game and great for soloing. Moving on to the second pet class, which is the Elementalist, and the Elementalist pets are the strongest in the game with a variety of different bonuses, especially their Earth pet, which has the ability to take a lot of hits and tank for the Elementalist, while they are able to use very strong nukes to decrease their time to kill quite significantly. They can also heal their pet in addition to that, making them basically a singular class with the holy trinity of tank, healer, and DPS all in one. In addition to that, they can charm elementals, so if you can find some elementals of your level, that can just further increase their solo ability even more. Now, one of the downsides to this, however, is that they are very mana hungry when they're trying to heal their pet. Their pets are not super mana efficient, and they lack self-heals themselves, although they could use Bind Wound, but that would use up quite a bit of cloth. I'm going to take the Elementalist, though, and I'm going to put them up here in S tier because of their ability to both tank and do damage and be able to heal. They can take down quite a bit of enemies, and they can do so fairly quickly with little downtime other than having to meditate. Next up, we have the Enchanter. This is kind of a special class, so I'm going to try to go over it as best as I can, but the Enchanter basically can charm, right? That's going to put it way up at the top when you're talking about solo ability, because it's able to kill anything that it can charm, because it just charms another one of those things and makes them fight each other, and assuming the charm doesn't break, they should win the fight because they can buff their charmed pet. They also have mana regen spells. They have stuns, which help it when the charm does break, with very, very little downtime because they can just charm another mob as soon as theirs gets low on health, etc. And then they have a lot of safety because they can just mez the mob and cast memory fog and just walk away and not have to worry about it. So the Enchanter is a very, very strong solo class. There are some cons to it, however, as it does not have any self-heal. So if it does take damage, it will take quite a while to heal back up. And its damaging spells are not very efficient at all. There's also a huge risk when you're charming things because the charm can break early, and then you can have two enemies coming at you at once, so you better be prepared for that. There's also a very high skill cap in being able to juggle all of those things at the same time, but if you can do it well, it is definitely an S tier solo class. Moving on to our very first tank, and that is the Fighter. Fighters don't boast a lot of abilities for solo ability. They do have high armor, however, and they have defensive buffs, which can reduce the amount of damage they take significantly. And then they also have very high DPS for a tank class. The only skill that I could really say that would be beneficial to them is a 6-second stun that is on a 1-minute cooldown. They also have an AoE fear that they could use. Unfortunately, that's on a 5-minute cooldown, and it only lasts for like 10 seconds. So kind of situational, but there's the Fighter pretty much. Unfortunately, they don't have a way to heal themselves back up, so they have very high downtime. They are a melee class, so they're going to always be in melee taking some damage. They could use Bind Wound, which could heal them back up a little bit faster, but that would use quite a bit of cloth as they do have a lot of health. With all of that said, I'm going to take Fighter. I'm going to put it down here at C tier. Some people are probably going to argue with that and be like, no, Fighters are really good and they can, do a lot more. You can move them up into B tier or something, but I'm just going to put them down here at C tier. I personally think they're one of the worst solo classes in the game. Moving right along to our second tank, and that is the Inquisitor. Inquisitors also have high armor with their being able to wear heavy armor. They are also fairly decent DPS for a tank, although not as much as a fighter is. But they do have the ability to mez mobs and stun mobs very consistently. They also have an unresistible charm, although it is a short duration. I believe 18 second is unresistible, so that's very nice, but it's also on a longer cooldown. And they are strong versus magic casters. And if they get into a situation where things are not going their way, they can mez the mob and then memory fog it, which basically allows them to just walk away, and they can dispel buffs on their target. So if they can find some spellcasters, mez them, drain their mana, they are able to take down spellcasters much easier than other classes because of their ability to drain their mana, which basically makes spellcasters kind of weak because they don't have a lot of those other strong melee abilities. Since they are now lacking all of their spellcasting abilities, you can take them down fairly easily. So I'm going to put Inquisitor slightly higher than that of a fighter with solo ability at a B, although I would say that it's a high C rank at best, maybe a low B rank. So, but we're going to put it at a B because it is slightly better than that of a fighter, in my opinion. Moving on to the Monk. The Monk does have the ability to heal itself by 30% of its health through the Mend ability. It has fairly high damage, a variety of stances which can increase its damage, its healing, its can add a stun, or its defense, and it can switch between those freely as needed. It's got an AoE stun for when things get a little bit hairy, a defensive buff that reduces damage from physical attacks significantly for a short duration and prevents them from being stunned. It can block without a shield, further reducing the amount of damage that they take. And if things get super crazy, they can just feign death and call it a day, so they don't have to take the XP loss when they go up against something that might be a little bit too tough for them. Now, that all is said, they can only wear leather armor, so their physical damage mitigation is not going to be as high as some other melee classes. And like I just said, they are a melee class, so they will be taking a little bit more damage. You could could get the Bind Wounds skill to help with some of that downtime, but their time to kill is actually fairly high. So I would say that the monk is going to fall into the A rank here, along with some of these other classes because of their time to kill and their ability to reduce downtime. That's why I would move them up above the B rank. Now we have the Necromancer. The Necromancer has a pet. It has high damage dots. It has a fear, a snare, charm undead. It can heal itself by life tapping its enemies, and it has a mana regen, which does cost itself health, but since it can life tap, it pretty much does it all. The Necromancer is almost all pros and very few cons. Maybe the only con is that it's a little bit lonely and the only person it will ever have to talk to is a skeleton. For all of those reasons, I'm going to put the Necromancer up here at the S tier. It is probably, in my opinion, and most people's opinion that know a lot about this game and similar type of games, the Necromancer is the best solo class in the game. So if you really want to be 100% solo and try to do as much as you possibly can, the Necromancer is probably the class for you. Next up, we have our third tank class, which is a Paladin. Paladins can wear heavy armor, which is going to reduce the amount of physical damage that they take. They can also heal with direct heals, lay on hands, which is a big heal on a long timer, and they have a proc heal, which does a little bit of damage and heals themselves. They also have a stun, which can prevent spellcasters from casting spells or just taking any action for a short amount of time. And they have a deflect ability, which reduces the amount of magical damage they take. So Paladins can take a lot of hits and they can heal themselves back up, reducing that downtime. They will have to meditate a little bit, but they also don't have the ability to do a lot of damage. They are going to do a little bit more damage than, say, a Cleric, but they're also not going to be able to heal themselves as well as a Cleric. For that reason, though, I'm going to put the Paladin up here in A tier, maybe a high B tier, and if you go up against Undead, it would definitely put them up in an A tier, may even move them up a little bit higher into an S tier versus Undead, but we're going to stick them there at an A tier for now. Next up, we have the Ranger class. Again, this is going to be another one of those classes that's going to be doing damage from range, which is going to significantly reduce its downtime as it's not going to be taking a lot of hits. If it does take hits, it does have the ability to heal itself, as it does have Druid spells, although they get them several levels later than a Druid, but it will be doing most of its damage from range, and it does have the ability to snare the mob, slowing them down, movement speed buffs to increase their movement speed so they can further gain distance from the mob to continue to do damage to it. It also has dots, which is going to make up for some of the difference between a Ranger's range damage and an Archer's range damage. Archers do have an additional buff that allow them to do a little bit more damage than a Ranger with their bow and arrow. So the Ranger does need to use those dots, and it also has a buffs for armor class, an HP buff, and then also damage shield buff. If the mob does get too close, it will do a little bit of damage back to them. This is going to put the Ranger for me at a high A tier or maybe even a low S tier. I'm going to put it at a low S tier just to differentiate it a little bit from the Archer, because it does have some of those spells and abilities that makes it slightly better than the Archer. And I don't want people to think, oh, well, the Ranger's in A tier and the Archer's in A tier, therefore they're equal. No, I do think that in solo ability, the Ranger is slightly above the Archer. Next up, we have the Rogue, and the only thing the Rogue really has going for it for solo ability is its high damage potential. Unfortunately, for a lot of that, you have to be behind the mob, and a highly skilled player could do that by sapping the mob, moving behind it, backstabbing it, or stunning it, moving behind it, and backstabbing it. So I'm going to say that the Rogue is a very low C tier. Maybe goes up to a B tier if you're highly skilled and you have the ability to sap a mob, move, and backstab it and continue to do that. Unfortunately, the Rogue has no way to heal itself. It's got low armor and it does have to be in melee. So a lot of that is really going to boil down to you as the player. And if you're willing to do a lot of these tricks and maneuvers to be able to damage down your mob without it doing a lot of damage to you. And for our final tank class, this is the Shadow Knight. The Shadow Knight does have heavy armor, reducing the amount of physical damage that it takes. It also gets a magical shield that reduces the amount of magic damage that it takes for 15 seconds. It does get dots, which is going to increase the amount of damage that it's able to do because it does not have dual wield, although it can use a two-handed weapon to do a little bit more damage than just a single weapon with a shield, although that will take away from some of its defense. It also gets a pet that doesn't do a lot of damage, but every little bit of damage helps. But really where the pet comes in is its ability to sacrifice the pet and gain an absorption shield from that pet sacrifice. It can also life tap its enemy, doing damage to it and healing itself. And it has an aura that allows it to proc a damage to the enemy and heal itself. And then finally, it has a harm touch for tougher enemies, giving a little bit of edge when you're fighting something a little bit stronger. You can harm touch it, although that is on a very long cooldown. Its spells are a little bit behind that of a Necromancer, as it is a hybrid class, and it will need to meditate between a few fights, maybe like 2 or 3 fights, and it's going to need to meditate to get that mana back up. So its downtime is a little bit higher than some other classes, but I'm still going to put the Shadow Knight at a low S tier rank. I want to put it above the Paladin because it is better, in my opinion, than the Paladin. And our last healer is the Shaman. The Shaman does get direct heals, heal over times, as well as regens, helping to reduce some of that downtime. It has very strong dots, second only to the Necromancer. It has the ability to root mobs, so you could root a mob, dot it up, and just watch it kind of melt away or wither away. You also get a pet at level 32 that does a little bit of damage and is not very tanky, so you wouldn't really want to use that while you're trying to root the mob because it probably will just turn and hit your wolf pet and take it out. But it does have some of the best debuffs and buffs in the game. It actually has the best attack speed slow debuff in the game, so you could put that on and as a shaman just face tank the mob and then heal up afterwards. The only thing is that they do consume quite a bit of mana with their buffs, their debuffs, their heals, all the dots. They use a lot of mana. They do get a consume ability, which helps them get that mana back quickly. And then they would have to consume and then, heal themselves back up. So their downtime is not as high as some other classes, but their time to kill is also not as high as other classes. So it kind of balances that out a little bit. I'm going to put the Shaman at a low A tier. I would almost put it down here in B tier, but because of the consumability and a well-played Shaman that, gets in the rhythm, could probably heal themselves back up, get their full mana fairly quickly, and then get right back into the fight. And then with the right items and the right debuffs without a lot of resist, they can really take out quite a few enemies. Moving on to the Spellblade. The Spellblade really only has 2 things going for it, and that is its high DPS potential, and I say potential because we're going to talk about that here in a second, and then its unstable barrier, which absorbs some damage, and it will be taking quite a bit of damage. That's going to bring us down to its cons. As it is a melee class, it will be taking quite a few hits, so the only thing it really has going for it there is that ability to absorb damage. So depending on how well that unstable barrier works, is going to dictate how well you're going to be able to solo. In addition to that, the high damage potential is really reliant on procs. If you proc a lot, it will be doing a lot of damage, making your time to kill significantly lower. And if you don't get a lot of procs, then the time to kill is going to be significantly higher, which is not going to be good for solo ability. It also has no heals, so no way to get its health back after a fight if it does take damage and that unstable barrier is not able to take to absorb a lot of that damage, which means it's going to have high downtime trying to get its health and mana back while it sits there and meditates. All of that together, I'm going to put it up here at a B tier. If you can find a way to make this class proc a lot, it could move up into an A tier, but if it doesn't proc very much at all, it's going to move down to a C tier and be one of the worst solo classes in the game. And finally, we have the Wizard. The Wizard's going to have the fastest time to kill in the game, being able to take down enemies super, super fast. It also can root the enemies to prevent them from coming anywhere near it. It has a stun and a knockback, so if it does come near them, they can push it away, stun it, reroute it, and just burn it down as fast as possible with their spells. The negative to this, however, is that it's going to use quite a bit of mana. If the mob does resist a lot, then the Wizard is going to be burning through even more mana, so it will have to sit down and meditate between fights, which does move it down a little bit, so it's downtime is going to be a little bit higher than some of these other classes up here at the top. So for that reason, we're going to put it in the A tier. It's very close to an S tier for me, but it will have quite a bit of downtime because it will have to meditate, but that time to kill is insanely fast with a wizard that is well played. Anyway, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed the content or found it helpful, please like, subscribe, and follow for more. Also be sure to tune in to my Twitch streams where we'll be playing and chatting about Monsters and Memories as well as many other games. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.